I'm Mike Steinberg. I'm the Executive Director of the Roxy Theater. The Roxy is a nonprofit movie theater here in Missoula. We run the International Wildlife Film Festival, which is an annual event. It happens in April. We also host the Montana Film Fest, which is coming up in October. Yeah, so what is it? It's a nonprofit, mission-driven community cinema is what we do. So we bring movies every night, independent films and documentaries and foreign films in new release, plus special programming throughout the month, which includes cult films and classic films and one-off programming that may be, like a documentary that's connected to a nonprofit group or a cause. We're also available for rental, and there's, increasingly as we get towards the end of the year, we'll see more and more office parties and birthday parties and whatever, company parties. We'll show Elf, for example, probably about 25 times before the year's over. So the Roxy was built in 1937, and it was a one-screen theater, seated about 600 people. And it was opened as what was called a second-run theater. In that era, before there was video or, before even television, movies would play at larger screen theaters, like for example the Wilma downtown or the Fox Theater, which used to be downtown. They would have their long run there, 7 or 8 weeks, and then they would come out to the neighborhood theater, just across the bridge technically, but it served the University District in the neighborhood. So it opened as that, and it was basically a opportunity for people in the neighborhood to see that film cheaper, and later on, Again, movies had much longer lives theatrically because they didn't have other lives. And in fact, lots of them, for years and years and years, would come back as special re-releases. And like Disney films, for example, were on cycle for every 5 years or every 7 years, they'd come back to the theater before there was cable TV or, The Roxy remained a second-run theater up until the 70s, and then they started to play films that were first run. There was competition on screen in town, so they couldn't get everything they wanted. And they actually converted in the mid-70s to a dollar theater, which was a trend for movie theaters. So you could either sell it for the real estate value or try to churn out popcorn money and basically get old titles, which would be late second run or tertiary run, third run, and play them for $1. Someone we met in this process of our renovation, because we've gotten a lot of people talking about the theater as a result. Someone we met had seen the early show. They were like, I was there, and then later on the day it was on fire. Like, what? It blew the doors across Higgins Avenue. So the theater sat for a few years. There was a little bit of a challenge to bring it back. It was the people who owned the theater at the time, and I don't have that readily available, but they were sort of fighting for keeping the theater here, and then there was an attempt to blight the land, and that was done by a neighboring business that wanted it as parking. So they made a big, big stink, and thankfully Missoula came to the rescue of the Roxy in 1994, or 95 or so. And then it was rebuilt and reopened in 1997 as a triplex, exactly. And it opened as a dollar show as well. I think it was a $2 show, but it was, again, a discount theater. At that point, there were about 20 screens in Missoula. And I'm sorry, 22 if you count, or 21 if you count the Crystal. So those were all in effect, and they were all first-run theaters. So there wasn't a lot of access to movies for the Roxy owners. So it didn't fare well. It only stayed open a couple of years. And then the International Wildlife Film Festival bought the building in 2000, and as a site for the festival annually, and officed their festival upstairs. About a dozen years, 11 or 12 years of owning the theater, not a lot happened. There was an occasional public screening. Opera went on for about 5 years, I think. Partnership with Morris Productions. Andy Morris runs that organization, and he's been running it now for 10 years or so. But what it is a contract with the National Theatre Live and the Met Opera. And the programming is extraordinary. It's simulcast from the UK for the National Theatre Productions and from New York for the Met Opera. And it's pretty much the top of the world in terms of opera and theater production. It's extraordinary to have that here in Missoula, Montana. I mean, you might be reading about this in, New York Times, or, if you read The Guardian or whatever, you can hear that these things are happening in the world. You actually see them and experience them, and you're also only paying $12. We have a great comedy community in Missoula. You know, there's a very vivacious and regular crowd that attends. So once a month on a Wednesday night, we have homegrown comedy, and it's a rotating group of comics. There's some open mic in there too, but there's some headliners and some people who are doing it, you know, on a regular basis, who may or may not call themselves pro, but they're pro. They're funny people. So we host that. We also do something called Movie Mockers, which is kind of in the vein of Mystery Science Theater. So we'll show a bad movie and have 3 or 4 comics up on a couch with live mics talking over the movie and just trashing it, just making fun of it. I personally love comedy, and we're lucky to have a couple big advocates of the comedy scene. John Howard, who runs those homegrown comedies, has, you know, within the last few months, you know, 5 months or so, been hired on as a manager here. He was just kind of showed up every month to do comedy, and they were like, let's hire John. Let's, you know. Aaron Roos also, once upon a time, big part of the Missoula improv comedy scene. Yeah. He was in the Shop, if you remember that gang back in the day. Yeah. So yeah, no, comedy is it's a nice component to have here. And like I said, they pack the place with their regular crowd, and the community floats around town. I mean, there's a few venues that they play regularly, and we're really proud to be one of them. So again, the theater was built in 1937, and after some attempt at restoration, the original sign was taken down before the fire, by the way. It had been replaced, and it's this flat, it's kind of greenish. It had been kind of, you know, defiled of its original Art Deco glory, and when they rebuilt, they brought it back the same way. That's what insurance money allowed them to do. And at some point in the early 2000s, they put in a wedge marquee, which was more practical. So anyway, they brought that in, which was functional, but it wasn't aesthetically in line with the theater. The facade remained. That was the only thing that they were able to keep. The entire theater was gutted, and the doors were needed replacing, of course. So it's part of bringing me on as the executive director. You know, there's a Wildlife Film Festival that owned this building, and so people thought of this building as just where the Wildlife Film Fest was. And the programming that we started began to develop an audience, but it wasn't necessarily connected to the IWFF, and so there were some questions of like, what are we? Some identity questions. Our organization, at that point, about 38 years old, had never done a strategic plan. And so we met as an organization, and we did interviews with stakeholders in the community, and got a lot of feedback. And one of the things that came out of the assessment and the planning was that we own this historic building and we should be stewarding it, you know? So the idea came about to give it a restoration. We met with a designer. In fact, the Hollywood Theater had undergone a big restoration and replaced their original marquee. We got in touch with that designer, this really wonderful man named Fernando Duarte, who specializes in deco and specifically in movie theaters. So we brought him out, did a bunch of research, found all these historic photos. Fernando's the kind of guy who, you know, his choice of neon and paint color is dictated by what was available in that era. That's how, you know, detail-oriented he is. So we had this extraordinary marquee fabricated in Sacramento at the sign company where he does most of his work. He supervised the project. Shipped to Missoula. Funny story was, I got a text. We heard it was arriving. We knew they were going to do the install the next day. Yeah. I got a text from somebody who was like, "Hey, look!" They were driving down the road and they saw the Roxy marquee on the back of a truck. And I was like, "Why didn't they tarp that thing?" But oh well, it made it. So so that's what led to that restoration, and we call it Redeco. Is our project, and our Give campaign is Give 37. So we're asking everyone in the community who believes in the Roxy, wants the Roxy, to give $37 in honor of the 1937. The day the Roxy opened was September 24th, 1937. On Friday the 22nd, we've got a double feature. The first film that I ever played at the Roxy was called Arizona Days. It's Tex Ritter, a singing cowboy western. So we're doubling that with A Day at the Races, also from 37, the Marx Brothers.
Yeah.
And we're going to do newsreels and cartoons and trailers from that year. And it's a double feature, and you're going to pay what you paid in 1937.
Which was?
A quarter.
Oh.
Saturday and Sunday, 2 more things. The Senior Center parking lot, we've got 2 outdoor screenings. We've got Pee-wee's Big Adventure is a
that's
bike in. So ride your bike in. The Scurfs are going to play before the show. And then as a surf rock band, they're really great. Oh, the other thing on that day on Sunday, the River City Swing Band is going to play before the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, also from 37. Probably played the Roxy, and then we light the marquee for the first time that night. The marquee, I should say, is authentic neon, like historic neon, not even modern neon, and definitely not LED.
Right.
So it's going to be pretty cool.